The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Faust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfaust.com.
I'd like to talk a little bit tonight about some of the real fundamental attentional strategies that I believe can make a really big difference in not only how you practice, but how you train your mind in life. And this will be about a 30-minute talk, and then we'll have some time for questions or sharings afterward. I remember once someone in a meditation training I was doing said, I'm really confused. Am I supposed to pay attention or relax? And I thought about it for a while, and I said, yes. Something so paradoxical about the instructions for meditation. On the one hand, you're supposed to really pay attention on purpose, develop concentration. And on the other hand, at the other extreme, there's this instruction to just let it be, just let go. How does that work? That's a little bit of what I'd like to talk about. I've certainly talked about these strategies a lot, so I was trying to think what's maybe a fresh way I might be able to talk about these sort of portals in training. And it came to me this morning after sunrise when I was paddling on the Potomac. I was like, oh, this is it. So I have a paddleboard, and I live near Riverbend Park. It's one of my favorite things in the world. And I have this whole system, which I don't know why anyone hasn't done this, but if you like to kayak or you've ever paddleboarded, you stand up on the paddleboard, but lots of times it's too windy or the waves are too strong, or certainly in a river going through like class 1, class 2, you don't want to do that standing up necessarily. So I take these 2 yoga blocks and I put them in a mesh shopping bag, and I sit on them like a meditation cushion, sort of zazen. And it's such a great way to motor up through rapids, and when I'm feeling too scared to stand up, I can sit down this way. And then sometimes I just float in, sort of like in Zen practice. It's a pretty blissful thing. But where I am is just above Great Falls, where I put in. And so I go upriver. And that means I've got to pay attention. It's a willful practice. And that's stage 1, you could say. That's concentration. It's paying attention on purpose. It's finding a rhythm of my breath, getting my body warmed up, and then motoring my way up through some relatively fast current with lots of rocks. So there's vectoring up and working my way up. This is a willful practice. It's a concentration practice. And the interesting byproduct of concentration, when you do concentration practice, is you begin to sort of calm your mind. It becomes more and more present moment based. As hard as it can be, because it's willful. This is that stage of meditation where your mind is just like a squirrel on caffeine. And you just are bringing it back again and again and again. There's tremendous benefit to that. You develop a muscle through developing concentration. The Buddha spoke about this form of practice as being arduous, but with an intention to see clearly, with an intention to wake up. When you bring that aspect of attention to your practice, you begin to cut through the stories. You begin to cut through your narrative. You begin to cut through all the fluff of where the mind goes. And you begin to see into certain aspects of your personality. But that aspect of concentration is very, very important in practice. But it's not the end. As I like to say, there are some very concentrated people on the planet who are miserable jerks. So we've all experienced the benefit of concentration. Have you ever been in a time in your life where you've had a goal, you got to finish that degree, or you got to make it happen, and somehow you just make it happen. And there's a tremendous sense of satisfaction that can come from applied concentration. So much of what you've achieved in your life is a direct expression of your capacity to sustain attention on something. So there's lots of strategies in the world around helping you cultivate concentration. I've explored a lot of those because I have a pretty distractible mind myself. I don't know if you know the Pomodoro method. It's a very helpful. You set a timer for 24 minutes, or is it 24 or 25? And you work for that period of time, then you take a 5-minute break, then you work for another 25, and you go through a series and then a longer break. But there's something about creating that focus time where you take a forced break that can help to keep you refreshed, helps keep you focused. It was called the Pomodoro method because the guy who created it had a kitchen timer in the shape of a tomato. So that was kind of fun. So we develop concentration, we develop our willful capacity to be effective by getting very, very clear in our priorities around eliminating distractions. I just read a great book called Essentialism, which is how do you go through the process of cutting out everything that isn't supporting you. It's an interesting, very interesting practice. So what this does is this is developing what's called shamatha. It's the ability to hold your mind on the object of meditation with clarity and stability for as long as you wish, conjoined with mental and physical pliancy, single-pointed concentration. It's a great skill. When you have something to get done, you set aside your worry, you focus on it, you complete it, deep satisfaction. So as I work my way up the river, one of the really cool things, one of the things I love about paddling on a really active river is you really get to interact with the current. And because there are lots of rocks in the Potomac, I always vector up behind certain rocks. And when there are rocks just below the surface and there's a wave coming over it, you can get your boat right behind the wave and you can surf right on that wave. And all the eddy goes around your boat, kind of holds you there with just a little bit of effort. In the middle of a really wild rapid, you can just sit there and be held by the river. It's a really fun thing to do. And I still have to be focused, but I can also relax a little bit. I'm more present to everything happening around me. And right now, all the Canada geese have their goslings out, like 2-3 days old, these little fluffy balls, paddling around the Potomac. So sort of being held in the river and noticing all the wildlife early in the morning. This is where we get a sense of, in our practice or in our life, where you are focused and concentrated, but you're also aware of the periphery. There's more a sense of who you are as the observer of everything that's happening. So it's sort of a hybrid of concentration, aliveness, but also a sense of broader awareness. And this is where in the practice, there develops what can be called the wisdom faculty. You're very, very concentrated. You're developing your ability to stay present through physical pain, emotional turbulence, and then you begin to get insights into how your mind works. You begin to see, when that belief kicks in, this is how it feels in my body. This is how I structure my life. Well, what if that belief isn't true? Or you begin to see the ways that you avoid, the ways you fantasize, the ways you disassociate. That wisdom faculty becomes more heightened out of your concentration, out of your ability to stay present to this flow of thoughts and beliefs and sensations. you begin to see how you react to life. You begin to see how you try to control. And then you get to really inquire into what feels real and what is true. Getting that distinction, which is a huge distinction. So here's what Ajahn Chah said about this quality of meditation. And Ajahn Chah is really considered one of the sort of like the most, I don't know if luminous isn't the right word, but like a real founding teacher sort of in the Theravadan tradition. He was Jack Kornfield's teacher and has really influenced sort of the expression of Buddhism or Buddhist psychology through that filter in the West. So here's what he has to say. Our thinking follows sense objects and pursues them wherever they go. Yet not any one of the sense objects is substantial. They are all impermanent, unsatisfactory, and empty. When they arise, observe them and see what happens. It's like looking after a buffalo in a rice paddy. When someone looks after a buffalo, he lets it walk around freely, but keeps an eye on it. If the buffalo goes near the rice plants, he yells at it and the buffalo backs off. If it doesn't obey, he gets to feel the hard end of the stick. The person watching the buffalo can't doze off, or he'll get up and find all the rice plants are eaten. The mind is like the buffalo, and the rice plants are like the sense objects. The one who knows is the owner. When observing the mind, the one who knows notices everything. It sees how the mind is when it follows sense objects, and how it is when it doesn't follow them. When the one who knows observes its mind like this, wisdom will arise. When the mind meets the objects, it'll grab hold, just like the buffalo will bite on a rice plant when it sees one. So wherever the mind goes, you must watch it. When it goes near the rice plants, shout at it. And if it will not obey, give it the stick. That's that combination of concentration, paying attention, but also that sense of who you are as the one who knows, the owner of both the mind and the senses. So this is an interesting place in meditation, where you are concentrated, but you're allowing the knowing faculty, the wisdom faculty to emerge. Sometimes it can feel a little bit like a zone. You're in kind of the zone there. So usually when I'm paddling, I make my way upriver. There's kind of a little intense set of rapids, so I have to make my way up. And then I go around an island. And then once I work my way around the tip of the island, then I'm back in the flow of the river. I still have to watch out a little bit because there are lots of rocks right under the surface. But for the most part, I'm not doing anything at that time. And it allows me to just watch the banks go by, watch the birds go by, see the color of the light. This morning there was a cormorant that came by real close with a stick in its mouth, for its nest. And this is the quality of practice where you are simply allowing your experience to be without trying to control it. There's really no hard stick, but just a sense of noticing the flow of your life. It's a real paradox, because you're intimately present, and just as I, at that time, because I'm fully alive from paddling and working hard, my senses are bright and alive, and yet I'm deeply relaxed and just awake to everything. So this is where we move from concentration practice to what we call vipassana, which is sort of the seeing clearly practice, where you're not only aware of what's happening, but you're aware of your relationship to what's happening, where you begin to see into the patterns of what's happening. But you're also cultivating this vast space of simply being awareness itself. Here's what Rinpoche says about this relationship. The ways of two aspects of meditation are practice, where one begins with the practice of shamatha, on the basis of that. And this shamatha is concentration, developing one-pointed awareness on purpose. On the basis of that, it becomes possible to practice vipassana. Through one's practice of vipassana, being based on and carried on in the midst of shamatha, one eventually ends up practicing a unification of shamatha and vipassana. This unification leads to a very clear and direct experience of the nature of things. It brings one very close to what one calls the ultimate truth. So this balance of concentration and observing without judgment leads to a sense of unification. This is to say, simply to a state of allowing your experience to be just as it is, where there is a sense of who you are as the mountain and everything that is moving around you, all the sensations, all the thoughts, all the moods, all the stories, all of that are just simply clouds coming by. Different weather systems taking form and moving on. And ultimately, you as the mountain falls away, and there's just simply awareness of what is, the capacity to let it be. Sometimes it's described as non-meditation meditation, as opposed to paying attention on purpose. You're simply allowing on purpose. So maybe we could just review these experientially, and then we'll take some time for any questions you might have about your practice. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And you might like to explore cultivating a sense of one-pointed attention for a period of time. And this doesn't have to be the breath. You might like to explore sounds. Perhaps this feeling in the palms and fingers and thumbs. Just selecting one of these senses. And just notice for the next few minutes if it's possible to sustain your awareness there. Just want to make sure you're awake. So sustaining attention on this experience. When the mind wanders, you bring it right back. Every time you wake up from a thought or a mood or a commentary, there's a letting go. You can re-enter the moment, re-relax, re-soften, and begin again. And you may notice a quality perhaps of foreground and background. Your anchor in the foreground and as you relax and widen your awareness. And notice what is changing. And sense who you are as the observer. You might sense this very delicate balance of concentration, and bringing yourself present in this dance with awareness, that which is aware, that which knows. Aware of what is happening as it's happening, and aware at the same time of how you are holding your experience. And you might, just for these next few minutes, just sense what it means to let it be, to release any concentration practice, but simply be present and to sense what it means to let it be, to let it flow. And just sense the imprint, feel the cumulative effect of this flow of concentration and non-judging awareness. And when you're ready, you can deepen the breath. And if you like, you can let your eyes open. It's no hurry. So I hope that was helpful. Just as a reminder of how you can train your attention. Inevitably, when we practice, there are challenges that occur. There's all kinds of obstacles and blocks and resistance that we encounter in our meditation. And oftentimes we stop practicing precisely because it's working, because it's sometimes gets difficult, and that resistance it's kind of juicy if you can hang in there. So I'd like to offer this space if you have any questions about your practice. We've tried lots of different techniques here in the last few months. Anything you might be challenged by. If you have a question, you can trust that probably other people have that same question. So we have a microphone which we're gonna bring around. This reminds me of a friend of mine from the ashram. His name was Ashvin from the ashram, and he was a great musician. And he said he used to play in bars, and he would just say to people, if you have a song that you like, write it down on a cocktail napkin and just put it up here on the piano. And his technique was that if he'd take the napkin and he'd look at it, and if he didn't know the song, he'd just say, "Oh, this is one of my favorites," and he'd play something he knew. So people are always amazed he knew every song on those napkins. So. So if you don't have a question, I'm going to start making them up.
So So just recently, I've had two friends who are diagnosed with metastatic cancer. And every time I meditate in the past 3 months, since these diagnoses have taken place, I find that a lot of negative and scary thoughts are coming in. And during the day, I'm kind of able to control it because, as you said, you're able to kind of concentrate on different things. And then when I take the time to, quote unquote, kind of focus on myself and think, I am more resistant to meditating because I get scared because of the thoughts that come up. So I was just wondering if you have any advice.
Wow, thank you. First of all, I'm so sorry. There's a story of Ajahn Chah in his, where you would go to learn to meditate with him. He would ask people 2 questions. He would just wander around, people would be meditating. He'd just go up and talk to people. And he would say, tell me about your suffering. And then people would tell them, what they're working with, their resistance, their fears, their unprocessed grief, all of that. He would listen to all of that. And then he would ask the second question, and he would say, can you bear it? Can you bear your suffering? And that's really kind of the essence of what this practice is, is acknowledging this is reality. 2 friends who are going through this process, and your affection for them, your concern for them, and the fear that it's sparked inside of you. That's wisdom to be able to say that. And I thank you for naming it out loud. So that's what's happening. And then the question is, can you bear it? How can you bear it? So the mind naturally turns to what's not working. And the mind fixates on pain. And it's a helpful thing because it's kept us alive on the planet. But it naturally goes to where the hurt is, where the fear is, where the deepest anxiety is. That's where it goes. So then it becomes a question of, given that natural movement of the mind, what choices do you have in how you pay attention? So one of them is the whole realm of wisdom, which is sort of like seeing into this is real, this is what's happening, everything born out of causes, conditions is subject to change. You're visited by the heavenly messenger of sickness and death. That's pretty huge. So one intentional strategy can be to learn how to remind yourself that this is natural, et cetera, et cetera. You can learn how to use concentration techniques to sort of turn your attention away from it. And then there's the whole strategy of how to actively investigate it, to actually, have tea with it. And that becomes yet another strategy, to lean into it. What is it that I'm afraid of? What am I believing about this? It can be a very powerful investigation. What's the attitude in my mind that's happening right now? What memories do I have associated to this that makes this so filled with suffering for me? And yet another strategy, which is perhaps the one that could be the most profound in many ways, is rather than through the lens of wisdom, sensing through the lens of compassion and through the lens of kindness. And that can be a very powerful practice, which is to send metta to your friends and to their family, to their loved ones. May these beings feel happy. May these beings feel safe from inner and outer harm. May these beings feel free from suffering. And to extend that to them and to their loved ones. For me, that becomes a very, very powerful practice as part of the lubrication that really allows us to be with something so raw and so real. And most importantly, maybe, is to practice that with yourself. and to bring that sense of kindness and compassion and well-wishing for yourself through this as well.
I'm very new to my practice, and excuse me, and I apologize if my question seems naive to those more experienced. But what is God in all this, and whatever this is in what you talk about? So that's my first question. And my second question is, depending on how you answer it first, how do you pray in this practice? Who do you pray to, or what do you pray to?
Wonderful. Let me kind of rephrase that. So your question was, how is God part of this practice, and how does one pray in the context of this practice? Is that right? Yeah, that's great. So the God question is a really interesting one. And there's a lot to sort out there because there are different concepts around what that, how one might define that. How I think, and this is just my distorted, warped perspective perhaps, but I tend to think of it, that Buddhist psychology, the lens is around finding what is true. It's really an investigation into truth. Like, what do we know to be true? So if that equals God, then I think it's on the same page. And so it's actually a very scientific filter, because it requires very, very deep investigation. And one of the things, as we talked about a few weeks ago, there's some traditions that call on faith, kind of a blind faith, of just sort of trust what you're told, which is not part of this practice. This practice relies on what we call verified faith. That here are some observations about the nature of reality. Now, if you sincerely investigate them, do you find them to be true for yourself? So this particular path, if you will, is a path of intense self-responsibility. No one's going to save you other than you yourself. And I think in many ways that's a very strong distinction in terms of the path. And then the question of prayer is such an interesting one. It's such an interesting one. How you wire that up is probably one of the most intimate things you'll ever do, from my perspective of what that means. What is it that is beyond you that you attune to, or if you let go of something, what are you letting go into? Is part of the way I think about it. So it reminds me of a story. I was on a month-long silent retreat, and it was maybe about 3 weeks in, and I was experiencing just intense physical pain just from sitting for 20-some days. And I was trying to figure out what I could do about it. And I tried, yoga, postures, all that sort of stuff. But it got where it was so painful, I just thought the only recourse I have to do is pray. And I'm not really sure what that means, but I just thought, whatever prayer means, that's what I'm doing right now. and the pain lifted. And I thought, oh my God, is it that easy? And it isn't, but it becomes a very, very interesting question. What is it that you would pray to? For some, it's a tradition, it's a lineage, it's a teacher, it's a symbol, whatever that may be. For some, it's nature. For some, it's the desire for freedom, the desire for release. Finding the language and wiring that for yourself is a very, very important part of the journey. The third Zen patriarch talked about how it's important to have two elements. He said there is the intellect, or the wisdom mind, which is to clearly understand as best you can the nature of reality, the nature of the path. It helps you to see, oh, these are the ways that I react when life isn't going my way, to see clearly into the 5 hindrances, see clearly into the nature of suffering, the cause of suffering, the release of suffering, the path that leads to suffering, all of that. That intellectual map is very, very important. But the other piece that he said that also needs to be cultivated is what he calls the faith mind. It's very much that space that you're speaking to, of where into what do you release your heart. And what I like about this path is that I think of this as a path of self-responsibility, that each of us has to figure that out. That help in some way? Thanks. Yes, Bob.
Excuse me. Over time, I regularly do meditation, and over time, my ability to focus or be aware has gotten less. More and more, my meditation I just kind of zone out. It's not that I'm obsessed about something. It's just that, I'm like a quarter asleep or something like that. So regardless of whether I'm trying to focus specifically on something like the breath or the sound, or more generally just trying to be aware of everything, it seems like I just go into kind of a torpor. At the same time, I feel my life is much better. I'm a kinder person, better person. I'm more at peace. So I wonder if you have any comments on, in terms of meditation, it seems like I'm not doing the practice the way I would like to, but something seems to be working. So
That's great. So you're doing it wrong, but things are going well. Right. I wouldn't question it any further than that. So there's one way to think about it, that even when you're meditating and you're sort of zoning out a little bit, one advantage of doing that is the trouble you're not getting into. So it's what you're not doing that might have more impact than what you're doing. Who knows? But there is something about the practice that it will have its seasons, I find. That there are times where the mind is sharp. There are times when the mind is just really, really muddy. It's the persistency that really, really does make a difference, I find. Because my practice has gone through so many different seasons of kind of inspiration and clarity to just dragging my butt to it, all the way to not doing it. So that's what's really important, I think, is that you're staying with it. There are just times when the mind is just always zoning out. But then you can also ask yourself, what does that zone out need? There's some monasteries where when someone was like really kind of zoning out or sleepy or really not paying attention, they would have them sit on the edge of a well. So you might consider that option. Just work your way down to the edge of your roof, and you might feel a little more aliveness going on there. Yeah. I'm glad that things are going well.
Hi. My question is that given the number of times that when you're leading us through the meditation, that you say, now bring your mind back as it's disappearing, and you have us refocus on the conditions of the room, or maybe something that we hear outside, or what have you. I understand that the mind is distracted, so when I have all sorts of thoughts, I was just now thinking about laundry and a project that's due at work and an argument I had yesterday and what's for dinner and all those things. I consider those things normal. But what I'm trying to get to is a state where my mind is just blank. So these things come and I go, not now, and something else comes and I go, not now. And I was wondering if this idea of a blankness is what I should be thinking about or concentrating on or working for.
So is the sense of a blankness or like a blank mind something we're wanting to cultivate or create?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, good. I once asked, I was giving a lecture at the World Bank on meditation, and it's kind of one of those amphitheater things, and I said, when you close your eyes, what do you think of when you hear the word meditation? And someone raised their hand and said, peace. And someone else said, tranquility. And someone else said, no thoughts. And there was someone in the back who raised their hand, and I saw the smirk on their face. And they said, pain, humiliation, and obsessive thinking. And I said, oh, you meditate. So it's an interesting thing because the mind just secretes thoughts, like an organ would secrete fluids, and 50,000 thoughts a day. So what I found is that there are very few ways or techniques that actually cultivate a blank mind. There are times of very, very deep concentration, or I should say absorption. When you get very, very absorbed in a particular focal point, it cultivates a very, very powerful consciousness shift. But there are actually still thoughts that happen even in those deep states, like very deep bliss absorption states. Thoughts still come in, and they still come and go. So I think really the difference is about shifting our relationship to thoughts, where rather than trying to make them go away or banish them, to actually learn how to say, oh, you're back. And just naming and noticing them is a very powerful practice unto itself. And in Tibetan, they say that some thoughts are self-liberating. Like as soon as you notice it, it loses its grip. As you're thinking of laundry, as soon as you notice, oh, thinking of laundry, the game is over. You've woken up out of that little bubble. I mean, the laundry isn't over, but you're thinking about it, your story about it is in that moment. So the practice of naming or simply noticing the thoughts as they arise can be very powerful unto itself. I hope that helps in some way. Yeah. Well, thank you for your time and attention. If you have any other questions about your practice, feel free to email me, or maybe I can talk about them in class at some point. I hope you manage to do and be tonight in a way that's satisfying for you. Enjoy. I think we have some refreshments out there, and you can watch the walkers if you want as well.